Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
I've lived in California my whole life. I grew up there, built my routine there, and for a long time I had this idea that eventually I'd leave, move somewhere quieter, more remote, somewhere that matched my personality a bit better. I've always been pretty introspective, the kind of person who actually enjoys being alone for long stretches of time. The problem is, I learned the hard way, twice actually, that there's a difference between liking isolation and depending on it. Both times I tried to move somewhere truly remote, I ended up realizing the same thing. I need the city. Not for the noise or the people, but for the safety of knowing that if something goes wrong, I'm not completely on my own. So over time, I figured out a balance that worked for me. I stayed in the city, kept my job, kept my routine, but every couple of months, whenever I could manage it, I'd disappear for a week into the mountains somewhere. That became my reset. Usually, I'd go to the same place. There was a cabin I knew well, somewhere I trusted, and I'll admit I got a bit possessive over it. Not in a literal sense, but it was mine in the way that matters. I knew the layout, I knew the area, I knew what to expect, and when you're spending time in remote places, that kind of predictability matters more than people think. There are 1,000 things that can go wrong out there, and familiarity takes a bit of that edge off. But this time, that option wasn't available. The owner told me one of the pipes had burst, and since the cabin was technically off-grid, but still had systems for hot water, internet, all the things that make it comfortable, it needed repairs. He said it wouldn't be ready in time. At the time, I took it as some kind of sign, like maybe I should switch things up a bit, go somewhere new, instead of repeating the same trip again. A few years back, I had traveled through the Great Smoky Mountains with a close friend, and I remembered how much I liked that area. The landscape, the atmosphere, the way everything felt just a little more raw and untouched. It's part of the Appalachian Mountains, and something about that region stuck with me. So I figured this was the perfect excuse to go back. I found a cabin online, read through the reviews, everything seemed solid. The owner was easy to talk to, very friendly. Funny enough, he actually lived in the same area of California as I did. At the time, I didn't think much of it, just another coincidence that made the whole thing feel like it was lining up the way it should. Looking back now, I think that's the part that bothers me the most. How right it all felt at the beginning. I booked the week and spent the days leading up to it working non-stop, just counting down until I could leave. When the day finally came, I packed up, got in the car, and started the drive. It wasn't a short trip, but it was a beautiful one. The kind of drive where you actually don't mind taking your time. There were stretches that got a bit dangerous, sharp turns, steep drops, areas where animals could cross at any moment. But I've always been careful with that. The idea of hitting an animal has always bothered me more than anything else, so I slowed down when I needed to. Paid attention, took my time. It meant getting there later than I could have. But I didn't mind. By the time I arrived, I was in a genuinely good mood. The cabin itself looked even better than I expected. Clean, well-kept, comfortable without losing that rustic feel. I remember texting the owner right away, telling him how happy I was with it, that it absolutely lived up to what I'd paid for. I even texted my mom, half joking, but also kind of serious, saying I might have found a new go-to spot and that my parents should try it sometime because I knew they'd enjoy it too. After that, I put my phone away and decided to make the most of the daylight. I went out for a few hikes, explored some nearby spots I had marked earlier. The trails were a bit demanding, but nothing I wasn't used to. By the time I got back near sunset, I was tired in that good way, the kind that comes from actually doing something physical. I grabbed some firewood before heading inside, knowing the temperature would drop once night set in. That contrast, cold outside, warmth inside, is something I've always loved. There's something about sitting in front of a fireplace that just settles everything down for me. So I got the fire going, took my time making a proper meal, nothing rushed, and by the time I sat down to eat, I was completely relaxed, full, warm, comfortable. Exactly what I had come there for. At some point, I stretched out on the couch. The fire going, TV on in the background, and I must have drifted off without even realizing it. I woke up suddenly. It wasn't midnight yet. I remember checking the time later, but what woke me felt real enough that I sat up immediately. It sounded like a phone ringing somewhere inside the cabin. Not mine, at least not the tone I use, but clearly a phone. It rang twice, maybe 3 times, then stopped. For a second, I was convinced it had been mine. But when I fully came to, there was nothing. No sound, no vibration, no missed call. Just silence. And I sat there, trying to make sense of it. I've had vivid dreams before, the kind that feel real enough to carry over into waking up. So my first instinct was to assume it had been that. Just a dream bleeding into reality for a second. Still, I didn't completely ignore it. I got up, did a quick check around the cabin. Nothing thorough, just enough to reassure myself. I even considered the possibility that maybe a previous guest had left a phone behind somewhere, but that didn't really add up either. The ringing had been too brief, too intentional. Still, nothing seemed out of place, so I let it go. I decided to call it a night, went upstairs, closed the bedroom door. I always sleep with it closed, and got into bed. I was still tired, so I fell asleep pretty quickly. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight hitting my face through the window. And that's something I've always liked, sleeping with the windows open, especially in places like that. It's one of the reasons I usually pick cabins with more than one floor, so I can sleep upstairs, feel a bit more exposed to the outside without actually being exposed. At least, that's what I thought. I woke up with the sunlight hitting my face, and for a few seconds, everything felt exactly the way I wanted it to feel. Calm, quiet, almost too perfect. I remember just lying there, letting that warmth sit on my skin, thinking that maybe this trip had been exactly what I needed after all. It's strange how quickly that kind of feeling can disappear. I rolled over, still half asleep, and looked toward the bedroom door. And that's when everything shifted. The door was open. It wasn't wide open, just enough to immediately feel wrong. And the reaction I had wasn't logical, it was physical. It felt like something in my chest tightened instantly, like my body reacted before my brain had time to catch up. I rarely wake up during the night, especially not in a place like that, where I was already exhausted from the drive and the hiking. I fall asleep and I stay asleep. And I knew with absolute certainty that I had closed that door before going to bed. Still, I didn't have proof, and that's the worst part about moments like these. Your brain immediately starts trying to calm you down, to come up with explanations that make more sense than the obvious one you don't want to accept. Maybe I got up in the middle of the night without remembering. Maybe I didn't close it all the way. Maybe it just looked closed and wasn't. But then that sound from the night before crept back into my mind. That phone ringing. Clear as anything, even if it had stopped almost immediately. And suddenly, it wasn't just one thing anymore. It was two things that didn't line up. I got out of bed and forced myself into a routine, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. I took a shower, hoping it would wake me up enough to shake off that feeling, to ground myself a bit. And for a moment, it worked. The hot water, the familiarity of something normal, it helped, until it didn't. I heard something. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it was enough. It sounded like movement somewhere else in the cabin. Not something falling, not something random, something deliberate. A door, maybe. And that's when the situation stopped feeling like overthinking. I stepped out of the bathroom and immediately noticed the bedroom door again. This time, it was closed. That was it. That was the moment everything clicked into place in the worst possible way. I had gone to sleep with it closed, woken up with it open, and now it was closed again. There was no version of that sequence that made sense if I was alone. I remember just standing there for a second, completely still, listening, trying to catch any sound that would confirm what I was already starting to believe. For some reason, I still don't fully understand. My first instinct was to check under the bed. Maybe because it's such an obvious place that you almost expect it to be empty. Maybe because part of me still hoped this was all nothing. I got down slowly, trying not to make too much noise, and looked underneath. And that's when I saw it. Right near the head of the bed, pushed up against the wall, there was a blanket. Not like something that had fallen, like something that had been used, tucked, shifted, disturbed in a way that felt intentional. And I didn't need to see anything else. I didn't need movement. I didn't need a face. I didn't need confirmation. My brain filled in the rest instantly. Someone had been under there. Whether they had been sleeping, hiding, watching, I don't know. But the idea that I had been lying right above someone, completely unaware, while they were close enough to hear me breathe, that's something I can't really describe properly. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, something that made my whole body feel weak for a second, like I couldn't fully process what I was realizing. After that, everything I did was automatic. I grabbed whatever I could as fast as I could, not even thinking about what I was leaving behind. I called the police while moving, barely able to explain properly what was happening, just giving them the location and telling them there was someone inside the cabin with me. I remember them asking me to stay on the line, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I shoved my phone into my pocket and focused on getting out. I didn't check the rest of the cabin. I didn't try to confirm anything else. I didn't want to see more. I just needed distance between me and that place. I got outside, ran to the car, got in, and drove. I don't even remember if I locked the cabin door. At that point, it didn't matter. I told the police where I was, that I was safe, and that they should still go check the property. The owner was contacted as well, and later I found out he actually made the trip out there himself. When I saw him, I could tell right away he had no idea what had happened. He looked just as shaken as I felt, which ruled out the one theory I had been clinging to, that maybe this was somehow connected to him. The police searched the cabin. They didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry, no clear evidence of someone being there, nothing that could give a concrete explanation. Just like that, it turned into one of those situations where you're left with more questions than answers and no real way to get closure. I never found out who was in that cabin, or why they were there, or how long they had been there before I even arrived. What I do know is that it changed something in me permanently. I don't look at places the same way anymore, especially places that feel isolated and quiet in a way that used to comfort me. And beds, especially ones with space underneath. I can't deal with them anymore. I check every single time. Even when I know there's nothing there, even when it doesn't make sense, I still check. Because once you've had that thought that someone could be right there, hidden in the one place you feel the most vulnerable, it doesn't really go away. This happened about 5 years ago, at a time when I really needed to get away for a while and clear my head. And if I'm being completely honest, my wife and I weren't in the best place either. It wasn't anything dramatic or explosive, nothing like that. It was more the kind of slow tension that builds up when two people spend too much time together without any real space to breathe, where even the smallest thing can turn into an argument simply because you're both already worn down. We both knew the relationship itself was solid, that it had something real underneath all of that. But we also knew we needed distance, not emotionally, just physically. Time to reset, to think clearly again, to stop reacting to every little thing like it mattered more than it actually did. So we came up with what felt like a reasonable plan at the time. We had already booked a cabin out in the Blue Ridge Mountains for a week. Nothing fancy, just something affordable that fit within what we could spend, and we figured we could turn that into something useful for both of us. The idea was simple. We'd each take an extra week off before the actual trip. I would head out there first on my own, and she would stay back at home and have the space to herself. That way we'd both get what we needed. A bit of quiet, a bit of distance. And then after that week, she'd join me at the cabin, and we'd spend the second week together, hopefully in a much better place. It made sense, at least on paper. So when the time came, that's exactly what we did. I packed my things, said goodbye to her, kissed her before I left, and we agreed that in about a week, we'd meet again at the cabin. I'd even planned to hike out a bit to meet her when she arrived, just to make it feel like something different, something a little more intentional The drive there was actually really pleasant. One of those long, quiet drives where you start to feel like you're already disconnecting from everything you left behind. And by the time I got close, I genuinely felt like this might be exactly what we both needed. That feeling didn't last very long once I actually got there. We already knew the cabin wasn't going to be anything special. We hadn't paid much for it, so I wasn't expecting luxury or anything close to it. But the moment I stepped inside, there were things that immediately didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just that it felt old or a little neglected. It was more about how exposed it felt. The front door didn't seem particularly sturdy, like it would hold up if someone really tried to force it open. And what bothered me even more was the windows. There were no shutters, no curtains, nothing at all that would block the view from the outside. Just glass. Which meant that at night, if I had the lights on inside, anyone out there could see me clearly. Every movement, every detail, while I wouldn't be able to see anything beyond my own reflection. That kind of imbalance, that feeling of being visible without being able to see who might be looking, it got under my skin almost immediately. I actually considered leaving right then and there, just turning around and going back. But we had signed one of those non-refundable agreements before booking, something I didn't think much about at the time, but suddenly felt a lot more real standing there inside that place. We had already spent part of our vacation money on it, and I didn't want to waste that, especially when the whole point of this trip was to step away and reset. So, I told myself I'd give it a couple of days, 2 or 3 at most, see how I felt, and then decide. Maybe it would just take some getting used to. That first night was uncomfortable in a way that's hard to fully explain. I've always been the kind of person who enjoys walking at night. I don't really get bothered by the dark, and the forest itself has never scared me in that way. But I do value privacy, and more than that, I don't like the idea of being watched without knowing who or what is watching me. Still, I tried to act normal. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and went for a short walk just to settle in, to get a feel for the place. But something felt off almost immediately, and I couldn't tell if it was just me, if it was the stress I had already built up because of the cabin, or if there was actually something about that place that didn't feel right. I remember feeling tense, more aware of my surroundings than usual, like my body had already decided something was wrong before my mind had caught up. That wasn't normal for me. I'm not particularly intuitive. My wife is much more like that than I am. She picks up on things quickly, trusts her instincts, and if she had been there with me, I honestly don't think she would have stayed a single night. She would have felt it immediately and left. To distract myself, or maybe just to feel a little less alone, I decided to call her while I was walking, just to check in, see how her day had been, keep things normal between us. But as we talked, and as I started explaining what the cabin was like, how exposed it felt, how there were no shutters or curtains, and how isolated the area really was, I could hear the concern in her voice right away. She didn't like it, not at all. She even suggested that maybe we should look into renting a different cabin nearby, something more secure, and that I could go check it out the next day, see if it felt better, safer, and if it did, she'd book it without hesitation. She made it clear she didn't mind spending a bit more if it meant we'd both feel comfortable there, And the longer I stayed on the phone with her, the stranger I started to feel. Not just uneasy, but exposed in a way that didn't make sense given how isolated the place was. I caught myself lowering my voice without realizing it, almost whispering at certain points, like there was someone nearby who shouldn't hear what I was saying, even though logically there shouldn't have been anyone around for miles. It was instinctive, not something I chose to do, and that's what made it worse. When I finally hung up, the silence felt heavier than before. And that's when I heard it. It came from my left. Not footsteps, nothing that clearly pointed to a person. Just this rough, dragging sound against wood, like something had slipped and tried to catch itself. Like fingernails scraping against the surface of a tree trunk as whatever was holding on lost its grip for a second. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. I don't think I can explain that moment any better than this, but whatever I felt right then, it was enough to make me turn around without thinking twice and start walking back toward the cabin as fast as I could without outright running. I've spent plenty of nights in the woods before. I'm used to isolation, to silence, to the kind of darkness that settles in once the sun is completely gone. But there's something very different about knowing you can step inside somewhere solid, close the door, shut the windows, and feel like whatever is out there stays out there. That sense of separation, that barrier, it matters more than people realize until it's gone. And in that cabin, I didn't feel any of that. The moment I got back inside and closed the door, I felt it again, how weak it was, how little it would actually take for someone to force their way in if they wanted to. And instead of feeling safer, I just felt trapped in a slightly smaller space. I didn't turn on the lights. I couldn't. If I did, I knew I wouldn't be able to see anything outside. And at least in the dark, I had the same chance of seeing something as anything out there had of seeing me. So I stayed in the dark. I moved slowly from window to window, keeping myself low, trying to look out without being too visible, scanning the tree line, the bushes, anything that might give me a sign that I wasn't alone out there. I don't know if describing it like this really does it justice, but those were some of the most unsettling minutes I've ever experienced. There's something deeply wrong about standing in complete darkness, surrounded by nothing, convinced something might be out there, and having absolutely no way to confirm it. I stayed like that for maybe 20 minutes, maybe a little more. Time felt stretched in a strange way. And at one point, at one of the windows, I thought I saw movement. Not clearly, not something I could point to and say with certainty. Just a shift among the bushes near the side of the cabin, subtle enough that I immediately started questioning whether I had actually seen anything at all, or if my mind was just filling in the gaps. That's where it got worse, because at that point, I didn't know what to trust anymore. Part of me felt like I was overreacting, that I was letting the discomfort of the cabin get to me, turning a normal situation into something it wasn't, ruining what was supposed to be a break, a reset. But another part of me kept pushing back, telling me that dismissing it too quickly could be just as dangerous, that if something was actually out there, pretending it wasn't wouldn't make it go away. It would just leave me unprepared. I knew exactly what my wife would have done in that situation. She would have chosen caution without hesitation. She would have rather been wrong and safe than right and in danger. Eventually, after sitting with it long enough, after not seeing anything clearly, not hearing anything else that I could point to, I convinced myself, at least enough to move forward, that I might be exaggerating it, that maybe there was nothing there. So I turned the lights on, and instantly everything outside disappeared. The glass turned into a mirror, reflecting the inside of the cabin back at me, leaving nothing but darkness beyond it. It didn't matter if something was standing just a few feet away from the window. I wouldn't have been able to see it. That's how dark it gets out there once the night fully sets in. There's no ambient light, nothing to help your eyes adjust. That night, I did what I could to feel even slightly safer. I dragged 2 chairs and wedged them under the door handle, knowing it wouldn't stop anyone determined, but at least it would make noise, enough to wake me up if someone tried to get in. After that, I went to bed, or at least I tried to. Falling asleep wasn't easy. The thought kept coming back over and over that someone could be standing just outside the cabin, watching, seeing everything while I had no way of knowing they were there. Even the bedroom didn't help. The cabin sat low to the ground. The windows were at a level where anyone outside would have a clear view in. The only solution I found was in the closet, where there were 2 old blankets. I used both of them to cover the windows completely, blocking the view from outside. It meant I was colder than I would have liked. The nights still had that early spring chill to them, but I preferred that over feeling exposed. I did sleep, eventually, but it wasn't restful. It was the kind of sleep where you never fully let go, where every small sound pulls you halfway back to being awake. By the time morning came, I had already made my decision. I wasn't staying there another night. I was leaving, no question about it. What I wasn't prepared for was what I saw when I pulled the blankets down from the windows. The outside of the glass, especially the one by the bedroom, was covered in handprints. Not just 1 or 2, dozens, smudged, overlapping, as if someone had been pressing their hands against the glass again and again, trying to see through it, trying to understand why they couldn't see inside. The way they were placed, the height, the repetition, it was clear that whoever had been out there had spent time at that window, watching and waiting. That was it for me. Any doubt I had disappeared in that moment. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been out there while I was walking, while I was inside, while I was trying to convince myself everything was fine. I packed as fast as I could, not caring about organization, just grabbing what mattered and throwing it together. I stepped outside and went straight for the car, moving as fast as I could without looking back. By the time I got there, I was out of breath, more from the adrenaline than anything else. But I got in, locked the doors, and started driving. I didn't call my wife right away. It took me about 20 minutes on the road before I felt far enough away to even think clearly. When I finally did call her, I told her everything. I told her I wasn't just uncomfortable staying in that cabin, I didn't even want to be anywhere near it. The idea of switching to another place nearby wasn't an option anymore. Whatever that was, whoever that was, I didn't want to risk being within reach of it again. I had a few theories, none of them good. Either it was someone who knew that cabin existed and used it to watch whoever stayed there, which is disturbing enough on its own, or it was someone who just happened to come across it, which I doubt, because there were too many coincidences for that to make sense. The one that stuck with me the most, the one I couldn't shake, was that it might have been the owner. That the lack of shutters, the lack of privacy, wasn't negligence, it was intentional. That they rented it out knowing exactly what it allowed them to do. I reported it to the police, but they told me there wasn't much they could do. No direct threat had been made. No physical harm had come to me, so there was nothing concrete to act on. One of the officers suggested I try to get a refund, maybe warn people online, share my experience. That was 5 years ago. I know for a fact that at least one other couple rented that same cabin after me and left early, saying they felt watched, unsafe, just like I did. Beyond that, I don't know how many more people have stayed there or how often this happens. What I do know is this. If you ever find yourself in a situation like that, don't try to rationalize it. Don't try to push through it just because you've already paid or because you think you might be overreacting. Trust what you feel. No amount of money is worth your safety. And no place is worth staying in if it makes you feel like you're not alone when you should be. About 5 years ago, I went through one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. It's one of those situations I never really got answers for, and if I'm being honest, I didn't go looking for them either. There was a part of me that felt like digging deeper would only put me in more danger, like some things are better left exactly where they are. At the time, I had just started seeing someone. We'd been talking for about 3 months, and for most of that time, I genuinely believed we were building something real. About a week before all of this happened, we had finally made things official. And to celebrate, he suggested we spend some time away together. He told me about this cabin deep in the woods that used to belong to his uncle, who had passed away and left it to him. He said he'd had it for around 5 years, and that it was a place he went to often, somewhere he felt at peace. The way he described it made it sound quiet, private, almost like a little escape from the world, and he asked if I wanted to go with him for a week. Before I go any further, I want to say something because I've told this story before, and I already know how people react. There's always that tendency to look back and point out what I should have noticed, what I should have questioned, how I should have known better. But the truth is, normal people don't go through life assuming everything is a threat. You don't analyze every word, every gesture, every invitation like it's dangerous. You trust, you interpret things in good faith, and sometimes that puts you in situations you don't fully understand until you're already in them. That doesn't make it your fault. So, yes, maybe I could have paid more attention. Maybe I could have said no. Maybe I could have reacted differently, but I didn't, and that doesn't make what happened my responsibility. At the time, the way he suggested the trip felt almost romantic in a very simple, unforced way. He made it sound like something special, like it meant something to him to bring me there. There was a moment where he started with that typical line, "I don't usually bring people here. This place is personal to me," that kind of thing. And I remember feeling slightly uncomfortable, like it was a bit too rehearsed. It didn't feel completely natural, but I brushed it off. I figured maybe he was just nervous or trying to impress me in his own awkward way. People do that. They exaggerate. They dramatize things a little, especially early on. So, I didn't push it. I told him it was fine, that I'd love to go, and even joked that I could help him fix the place up a bit while we were there, give it a more lived-in feel. He seemed to like that idea. The moment we arrived, though, something felt off, and it hit me immediately. The smell was the first thing. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't something you could ignore or get used to slowly. It was strong, invasive, almost physical. My body reacted before I could even process it properly. It wasn't just unpleasant, it felt wrong. The closest thing I can compare it to is the smell of something dead. But even that doesn't fully capture it. There was something about it that triggered a kind of instinctive alarm, like my body was trying to tell me to leave before my brain had caught up. He noticed my reaction right away and was quick to explain it. He said that in areas like that, it wasn't unusual. Animals die in the woods all the time. Sometimes they get trapped. Sometimes they end up under structures, and the smell can linger. He said it so casually, so matter of fact, that for a second I questioned myself instead of him. I'm not someone who grew up around forests. I'm a city person. I don't have that kind of reference. So I told myself maybe this was normal, maybe I just wasn't used to it. We even tried to figure out where it was coming from. We walked around the cabin, checked different corners, different rooms. But the smell didn't seem localized. It was just everywhere, like it had settled into the place itself. Eventually, we just assumed it was coming from outside, and that the wind was carrying it in. He even mentioned that he'd spent so much time there that he barely noticed it anymore, which, at the time, I tried to accept. But deep down, it didn't sit right. That kind of smell doesn't just become background noise. Not like that. I remember telling him I was glad I'd brought perfume, because there were moments where it genuinely made me feel nauseous. I even asked if maybe we should consider leaving, finding somewhere else, because I didn't think I could handle a whole week like that. That's when his tone changed. It wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. He went from calm and reassuring to irritated, almost defensive. He said I was overreacting, that I was acting like a child, that this was a normal thing, and if I wasn't comfortable, maybe I shouldn't have come at all. There was something sharp in the way he said it. Something that caught me off guard. It felt mean. And I remember thinking, maybe I'm the one being unfair. Maybe I showed up to his place and immediately started complaining. Maybe I was being ungrateful. So I tried to dial it back, told myself I just needed a day or two to adjust, that the smell would fade or I'd get used to it. But that first night was awful. He fell asleep almost instantly, completely undisturbed, while I spent hours going back and forth to the bathroom, spraying perfume, even showering in the middle of the night, because I felt like the smell was clinging to my skin. It made me feel physically dirty in a way I can't fully explain. The next morning, I told him again that I wasn't comfortable, that maybe we should leave early. I asked if there was any way to call someone, get a ride, anything. That's when he told me there was no signal out there, that they hadn't come with any intention of staying connected, that the whole point was to be off the grid, just the two of us. And again, the way he said it wasn't gentle. It felt like he was already losing patience with me. He said he was tired of hearing me complain that I was ruining the experience over something stupid, and that if I wanted, I could go for a walk and clear my head. He said that's what he was going to do, go out for a while, and that I could either come with him or stay behind. Something about the way he spoke to me in that moment really got to me. Not just what he said, but how he said it. It felt dismissive, almost cold. I was upset, and instead of thinking it through, I reacted. I told him to go, that I'd stay. And that's when I noticed it. That brief hesitation. It was subtle, but it was there. Like he didn't fully expect that answer. Like he actually wanted me to go with him. For a second, it felt like he was reconsidering, like he was about to insist. But then he just said, "Fine," and left. 3 months into a relationship is nothing. That's still supposed to be the easy phase, where everything feels light, where people are on their best behavior. And at that point, I remember thinking very clearly, the moment I get out of here, this is over. Whatever this was, it wasn't something I wanted to be part of. But at the same time, I was aware of the situation I was in. I didn't know where I was exactly. I didn't know how to navigate the forest. I had no signal, no way to contact anyone. I was completely dependent on the person I had just decided I didn't trust. So, I made a decision. I would play along. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't escalate anything. I'd wait until we left, and then I'd walk away from the relationship safely. It wasn't about being dishonest. It was about protecting myself. Because the reality is, you hear too many stories of situations turning dangerous the moment someone feels rejected. And I wasn't willing to take that risk. I stood there, watching him walk away into the trees, and for the first time since we'd arrived, I felt completely alone. For about 20 minutes after he left, I just sat there on the couch, completely still, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. My mind kept going in circles, running through options, but none of them felt real or possible. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how far the nearest road was. I didn't even know which direction I would need to go if I tried to leave on my own. But at the same time, sitting there doing nothing didn't feel right either. So I convinced myself to at least try to understand the smell, to prove, one way or another, whether I had been overreacting or not. Part of me still wanted to believe he was right, that this was something explainable, something normal that I just wasn't used to. I started inside the cabin first, checking every room, every corner, looking for anything that could explain it. A small animal, something trapped, anything. But there was nothing. Then I went outside, walked around the clearing, checked the immediate area around the house, but again, nothing. That's when I remembered the storage structure a bit further out, still within the property, but slightly removed from the main cabin. We had passed by it the day before, and I remembered very clearly that it was locked with a padlock. He had told me it was off limits, that it held his uncle's and his father's belongings, things he wasn't ready to go through yet. At the time, I had actually found that kind of touching. It sounded like grief, like someone holding on to memories until they felt strong enough to face them. But that was also the area where the smell felt strongest. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe something had gotten in through the structure. It was old, worn down, and died inside. Or maybe it really was just the age of the place. Materials breaking down, something chemical I didn't understand. But there was a window on the side, and when I leaned in to look, I noticed something strange. The frame was rusted, stiff, like it hadn't been touched in years. But when I pressed against it, I could feel that it wasn't fully sealed. Like it was technically closed, but not locked into place. And with a bit more force, I realized I could probably open it. I wasn't prepared for what happened when I did. The smell that came out of that space hit me like a wall. It was sharp, acidic, overwhelming in a way that made my eyes water instantly. I started tearing up without even realizing it, my body reacting before I could think. It was so much worse than outside, so much more concentrated, that for a second I almost stepped back and closed the window again. I should have. Instead, I leaned in further, trying to see inside. What I saw is something I still struggle to put into words in a way that feels accurate. The entire interior looked like it had been turned into bare earth, like the floor had been dug up and disturbed over and over again. There were tools scattered around, knives, axes, things that didn't belong in a space like that. Not arranged, not stored, just left there. And off to one side, there was a blanket on the ground, dirty, soaked through, stained in a way that didn't leave much room for interpretation. I didn't even have time to fully process all of that before my eyes shifted downward, closer to where I was leaning. And that's when I saw it. A body. There was a woman lying there, partially turned, still dressed. And the only reason I noticed her at first was because of her hand. It was positioned just right for the light from the window to catch something. A ring. That's what drew my attention. And the moment I focused on it, everything else fell into place. The ring was identical to the one he had given me a week earlier. I didn't think. I didn't question it. My body just reacted. I ran back to the cabin as fast as I could, barely aware of how I got there, grabbed whatever I could carry, my phone, the essentials, the small first aid kit I had packed, and shoved everything into my bag. I couldn't stop crying. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold on to anything, and my breathing was completely out of control. It felt like my entire body had switched into survival mode all at once. And then I ran. I ran straight into the forest without any sense of direction, without any plan. I didn't care about getting lost. I didn't care about animals. I didn't care about anything except getting as far away from that place as possible. I had no idea how long I was running for. I'm not athletic, not even close. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Adrenaline does things to your body you don't think are possible. I just kept going, pushing past every limit I thought I had, until eventually my body forced me to stop. I remember collapsing, trying to breathe, crying uncontrollably for maybe 15 minutes before forcing myself up again. And then I kept going. Slower this time, but still moving, still trying to put as much distance as I could between me and that cabin. By the time it was starting to get dark, I was convinced he had already gone back, seen the open window, realized I had found out. I was sure he would come after me. That thought alone kept me moving. And then, finally, I saw another cabin. I don't even remember reaching it properly. I just remember banging on the door, begging for help. A family lived there, people I had never seen before, and they let me in without hesitation. They could tell something was wrong immediately. They told me they didn't have signal either, but they had a satellite phone, and that they would call for help. That was the first moment I felt something close to relief, even though the panic never really left. Part of me was still afraid that somehow this could be connected, that I had just walked into something worse. But there was nothing about them that felt wrong. They were kind, calm, grounded in a way that made me feel safe enough to finally breathe. About an hour and a half later, park rangers and police arrived. From that point on, everything moved quickly. They were incredibly professional, incredibly kind. I was taken to the hospital, kept under observation, and they handled everything with a level of care I honestly wasn't expecting. One of the officers explained that in situations like this, especially involving relationships, the priority is always the victim's safety and privacy. My identity was protected, and everything was handled discreetly. Later, I found out I had run much farther than I thought, miles. Enough that the family who helped me didn't even know that cabin existed. They had no connection to it at all. The area was searched, and when authorities got there, the smell was still present. There were signs that something had happened, disturbed ground, indications that the space had been used, but everything I had seen was gone. No body, no blanket, no tools, nothing concrete left behind. But the dogs reacted. They brought in cadaver dogs, and they alerted in that exact area. Something had been there. It's been 5 years now. The case is still open. I've never seen him again. I moved, completely changed where I live. I'm not in witness protection or anything like that, but I made sure he would never be able to find me. As far as I know, he's still being investigated, but nothing has been made public. No arrests, no closure. And that's the part that's hardest to live with, because I know what I saw. And somewhere out there, there's at least one family that still doesn't know what happened to someone they lost. Meanwhile, he's still out there, still free, still able to exist like nothing ever happened. And I'm the one left waiting, stuck with something I can't forget and can't prove. Hi, my name is John. What I'm about to tell you happened around 2 months ago. And I'll be honest, at the time, I don't think I gave it the weight it deserved. It was definitely unsettling in the moment. But I brushed a lot of it off. Didn't really stop to think about how wrong things actually were. It's only been over these last couple of days, being back home, replaying everything over and over again in my head, going through every detail, every decision, everything I ignored, that I've realized how bad it could have gone. I got out of it fine, nothing actually happened to me physically, but looking back, it was one of the strangest and most genuinely disturbing situations I've ever been in. At the time, I didn't even know what to think, because I had never experienced anything like that before. And that uncertainty made it worse. To get straight to it, I've always been someone who enjoys spending time in the mountains. And I've spent a lot of time in the woods, camping, hiking, climbing. I've done a bit of the Pacific Crest Trail, spent some time camping down in Texas too. But one thing about me is that I've never really done any of it alone. I've always had people with me. The truth is, I'm not great with isolation. I don't handle being alone very well, and I don't really handle being left alone with my own thoughts either. I don't like being at home alone. I don't like doing things by myself. And as I got older, I started realizing that's not exactly a great trait to have. It makes you impulsive, in a way. The first thought that comes into your head is usually the one that comes out of your mouth, because you're not used to sitting with your thoughts, breaking them down, actually thinking things through properly. It was actually my girlfriend who pointed that out to me, and over time I realized she was right. It was affecting me more than I wanted to admit. So, this time I decided to do something different. I planned a short trip, 3 nights out in the Appalachians, and I made a point of doing it alone. The idea was to force myself into that space, to sit with it, to get used to it. The first part would be proper camping, and then for the last 2 nights, I booked a cabin that was relatively close to a small town. Not completely isolated, but still remote enough to feel like it. The cabin itself was cheaper because it was shared. Basically, it had a ground floor and an upper floor, both fully independent. Separate kitchens, separate bathrooms, everything. The only connection between them was an internal door. But it wasn't like a front door. It wasn't that solid. Still, the owner made it sound safe. He said he always knew who was staying there, had everyone's details, did some basic checks. Before booking, I even told him I was flexible with dates and asked if there was a weekend where I'd most likely be alone there. He said that for the dates I picked, nobody else had booked. I even checked again about a week before leaving, just to be sure, and he confirmed it, so I went ahead with it. The first 3 days went great, no issues at all. Honestly, it was better than I expected. I was a little on edge, just because I'm not used to being alone like that, and isolation does mess with your head a bit. But nothing major. Everything felt under control. That changed when I got to the cabin. At first, it seemed empty. I got there, settled in, nothing unusual. But maybe 5 minutes after I walked in, I heard footsteps upstairs, clear as day, and right away, I knew I wasn't alone there. I won't lie, I was a bit annoyed. Not because it wasn't allowed, but because the owner hadn't told me. Still, I knew it was always a possibility, so I tried not to let it bother me too much. I checked the door connecting the 2 floors, and it was actually sturdier than I expected, which helped a bit. My plan was simple, just avoid them as much as possible. I didn't feel like socializing, I just wanted my space. That first night, I noticed something that already felt off. During the day, I barely heard anything from upstairs. But as soon as it got dark, they started moving around constantly. Back and forth, non-stop. It went on for hours. I barely slept. The next morning, I decided to go talk to them. Not in a confrontational way, just to introduce myself, be polite, and maybe get a sense of who they were. I knocked, they answered, and right away I could tell something was off. And I don't mean that lightly. They were genuinely strange. The way they looked, the way they spoke, the way they carried themselves. It all felt wrong in a way that's hard to explain without sounding paranoid. But I'm not exaggerating. There was just something about them. They told me they were night people, said they slept during the day and stayed up all night, moving around, doing their own thing. I didn't really know what to say to that. I just asked if they could maybe keep the noise down a bit during the night because I was trying to sleep. They didn't apologize, didn't really react much at all, just kind of acknowledged it. So I left it at that and went back downstairs. I spent the rest of the day out hiking, trying not to think too much about it, but it stuck with me. The whole interaction just didn't feel right. That evening, when I got back, they were both at the window upstairs, watching me as I walked in. They waved. I waved back, trying to keep things normal. As soon as I got inside, they came downstairs and knocked on my door. Started asking how my day was, making small talk. Then they invited me to have dinner with them. I thanked them, but I said no. I explained that I had booked the trip to spend some time alone, that I needed that space. And that's when their attitude shifted. It was subtle, but noticeable. They didn't like that answer. I tried to smooth it over, made it clear it wasn't about them, just something I needed personally. Eventually, they left, but the vibe was off. That night, I was expecting another restless night with all the noise, but around 11 p.m., I heard their door open and close, and then footsteps heading away from the cabin. I assumed they were going on one of their night walks, which honestly was a relief. It meant I might actually get some sleep. And I did, for a few hours. Around 4 a.m., I woke up. I tend to wake up a few times during the night anyway, usually to go to the bathroom, so that part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was what I saw when I opened my eyes. They were both outside my window, right up against the glass, just standing there, looking in at me while I slept. I can't even describe the kind of shock that hit me in that moment. I jumped up immediately, went to the window, and asked them what the hell they were doing. And the worst part? They didn't even try to hide it. They didn't look embarrassed, didn't try to come up with an excuse. They just said they had seen me sleeping and wanted to check if I was okay, if I was finally getting some rest after the night before. At that point, I was already irritated. But more than that, I was uncomfortable in a way that's hard to explain. I told them straight up that they couldn't do that it wasn't okay. I went to close the curtains, something I hadn't even thought was necessary before, which in hindsight feels insane, but at the time, it just didn't cross my mind. As you can probably imagine, I spent the rest of that night completely awake, just lying there staring at the ceiling, going over what had just happened again and again in my head. There wasn't even a question of going back to sleep. I kept thinking about the way they were standing there, how normal they acted about it, how none of it felt right. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it crossed into something else entirely, something that didn't sit right no matter how much I tried to rationalize it. I kept asking myself why they were even there, why they felt the need to watch me like that. And the more I thought about it, the worse it got. That was supposed to be my last night at the cabin anyway, but even if it hadn't been, there's no way I would have stayed another one after that. As soon as morning came, I didn't waste any time. I packed everything up as quickly as I could, didn't go upstairs, didn't try to talk to them, didn't even want to risk another interaction. I just wanted to get out of there. I made sure I had my things, threw everything into the car, and left. I didn't run, but I moved with that same urgency. Like my body just wanted distance between me and that place as fast as possible. Once I was out of the forest and back on a proper road, I finally called the owner and told him that something really uncomfortable had happened, that there had been people staying in the upper level and that their behavior had crossed a line. There was a pause on the phone, and then he told me something that, honestly, made everything feel even worse. He said there was no one else booked at the cabin. According to him, I was supposed to be the only person there. And that just added a whole other layer to it. Because then what was that? What exactly had I spent 2 nights living with? 2 people who were clearly there before I arrived, who acted like they belonged there, who moved around all night, who watched me sleep, and somehow weren't supposed to be there at all. No booking, no record, nothing. I don't have answers to any of that, and honestly, I'm not even sure I want them. All I know is that this has been stuck in my head for the past 2 months. The more I think about it, the less sense it makes, and the more it bothers me. It's one of those situations where nothing technically happened, but at the same time, something definitely wasn't right. It just made me realize how strange people can be, how unpredictable, and how quickly a situation that seems completely normal can turn into something that genuinely unsettles you. I do know one thing though, I'm not making those same mistakes again. I'm not sleeping in a cabin with open visibility like that, where anyone can just stand outside and look in. I don't know how I didn't think about that before, but I won't ignore it again. And I'm definitely not staying in shared cabins with people I don't know, no matter how much cheaper it is. It's just not worth it. I've always been the kind of person who feels most at ease out in the mountains. Over the years, I've hiked and climbed in a lot of different places across the US. But there's something about the Appalachian range that keeps pulling me back. It's not the folklore or the stories people like to attach to it. It's much simpler than that. The geology, the terrain, the sheer variety you get within relatively short distances. It's one of the few places that never really feels repetitive to me. Because I work remotely, I've been able to take advantage of that and spend long stretches of time out there, moving around, camping, climbing, just living a bit outside the usual routine. A lot of the time, I manage to bring people along, friends from work who can do the same. But I've also done plenty of those trips alone. The one I'm about to tell you about happened roughly 2 springs ago, and to this day, I still don't really know what to make of it. All I know is that whenever it crosses my mind, I get this immediate physical reaction, like a chill that doesn't quite make sense. I come from a background where people tend to look for logical explanations first, where anything that even leans toward the unexplained gets dismissed pretty quickly. So, it's not exactly the kind of story I've had many chances to share. But it did happen, and it stuck with me in a way very few things ever have. Getting straight to it, I was hiking and climbing through a section of the Appalachians on the West Virginia side, fairly far up, close enough to more remote stretches that you don't see many people for days at a time. I'd already been out there for about a week, and I knew going in that the weather could shift quickly. I was prepared for temperature drops, for rain, for the usual unpredictability. But there was a point where it started coming down a lot harder than I expected. Not just a passing shower, steady, heavy rain that didn't look like it was going anywhere anytime soon. So I started looking for some kind of cover, just somewhere to wait it out. That's when I spotted a structure off in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was some kind of cabin sitting up on a small rise. From afar, I couldn't tell if it had been someone's home at some point, or if it was one of those old fire lookout structures you sometimes find in that region. If it was a lookout, it would have been perfect. Once I reached it and stepped inside, it became pretty clear that it had been abandoned for a long time. It didn't have that semi-maintained look those lookout towers usually have, where hikers still pass through and use them occasionally. This felt different. The place was in rough shape, worn down in a way that suggested no one had cared about it in years. I tried the lights out of habit, but nothing worked. Still, with a flashlight, I could see enough to tell that it had once been lived in. There were remnants of furniture. The layout made sense as a home, just left behind. Even in that state, it did what I needed it to do. It kept the rain off me, gave me a chance to sit down and wait things out for a bit. I had no intention of staying long, definitely no intention of sleeping there. But this is where one of my worst habits kicked in. I've always had this ability, if you want to call it that, to fall asleep almost anywhere. It doesn't matter if I'm on a bus, a train, sitting in a corner at a friend's place, even in situations where I probably shouldn't feel comfortable enough to sleep. I just do. It's been useful at times, but it's also gotten me into situations I probably could have avoided. That day was one of them. I leaned back into a corner, telling myself I'd just rest for a minute while the rain eased up. The place didn't exactly feel welcoming. There was something off about it. But I was tired, a bit worn down from the past few days. And before I really registered it, I'd closed my eyes. When I woke up, it wasn't gradual. It was one of those sudden, sharp wake-ups where your body reacts before your mind catches up. I didn't even know what had pulled me out of sleep, just that something felt wrong. I opened my eyes, and across from me, in the opposite corner of the cabin, there was a shape. At first, my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coat hanging off something. Maybe part of the structure casting a shadow in a strange way. But the longer I looked, the less convincing those explanations felt. There was a stillness to it that didn't match an object, but at the same time, it wasn't moving enough to immediately register as a person either. I just sat there, completely still, trying to figure out what I was looking at, hoping, honestly, that it was anything other than someone standing there watching me. After a few seconds that felt way longer than they should have, I slowly reached for my flashlight and aimed it directly at the shape. I don't know exactly what I expected, but I definitely wasn't prepared for how it reacted. The moment the light hit it, it moved, fast, almost instinctively, like someone flinching from sudden brightness. It raised something in front of its face, let out this strange, strained sound that didn't quite sound like a normal shout, and kind of folded into itself. That was enough. I didn't wait to understand it, didn't try to get a better look. I just panicked. I bolted out of that cabin without thinking twice. I'm pretty sure I left one of my bags behind, but luckily, it wasn't anything essential. I had what I needed on me, and at that point, survival instinct just took over. I ran straight into the rain, not even caring about the terrain, just putting as much distance as I could between me and that place. I kept going until I found a shallow rock overhang where I could at least get partially out of the rain and catch my breath. Even then, my mind wouldn't settle. What I'd seen inside that cabin, it had to be a person. But I couldn't understand how. I had checked the place when I came in, swept it with the flashlight, and I was almost certain no one had been there. So where did that person come from? How long had they been there? Were they already inside, just out of sight, watching me the entire time I was asleep? The longer I sat there thinking about it, the worse it felt. I must have been under that rock for close to an hour when I heard something in the distance. A shout. It didn't come from the direction of the cabin. This sounded different, clearer, like an actual call for help. It sounded like a man. Given how slick the ground had gotten with the rain, it wasn't hard to imagine someone slipping, getting hurt. So, despite everything that had just happened, I decided to check it out. I started calling back, moving toward the sound, and eventually I found him. An older man, probably in his 70s, who had slipped while trying to follow his dog into the woods. He told me he'd heard something out there. The dog had taken off after it, and he'd gone after the dog and lost his footing. He'd tried calling for his wife, who was still back at their place, but she hadn't heard him. I helped him up, made sure he was okay, and after a bit, we managed to locate the dog, which had circled back once it heard him calling. From there, I helped both of them make their way back to their cabin. On the way, he asked me what I was doing out there, and I explained that I'd been hiking and got caught in the rain. He didn't hesitate. He offered me a place to stay for the night, said I could crash on their pull-out couch until the weather cleared. I was still shaken from what had just happened, and the idea of being somewhere warm, taking a shower, eating a proper meal, it sounded exactly like what I needed in that moment. Older couples like that tend to be incredibly kind, and more often than not, they know how to make you feel at home without trying too hard. So, I accepted. They were both genuinely welcoming. I got cleaned up, started to relax a little, and for the first time since leaving that other cabin, I felt like my body was starting to come down from the adrenaline. I'll be honest though, I wasn't planning on bringing up what had just happened. We were sitting down for dinner later that night, and for the first time since everything had happened, things started to feel normal again. Warm food, conversation, the kind of environment that makes your body finally unclench without you even realizing it. That's when his wife casually mentioned that her husband had been very lucky to run into me out there, especially given how unpredictable the terrain gets after heavy rain. She smiled and added that their dog was usually very sweet, really well behaved, but that every now and then he'd get spooked by something they couldn't hear. She pointed vaguely in the direction of the hill and said that, for some reason, it always seemed to be connected to that old cabin up there. According to her, the dog would sometimes pick up on sounds coming from that direction, sounds neither of them could hear. and would go from calm to completely agitated in seconds, running off toward the cabin, barking like something was there. She even laughed a little, saying they never understood how he could hear anything from that distance, but dogs hear things we don't, so they just chalked it up to that. The moment she said that, I felt it hit me. I don't even know how to describe it properly, but it was like all the blood drained from my face at once. I think it showed because she immediately stopped mid-sentence and asked if I was okay, if something was wrong. That's when I told them. I explained that I had actually been inside that cabin earlier, that I hadn't seen anyone when I first walked in, that I had checked the place, and that everything seemed empty. But then I told them how I'd fallen asleep, and how when I woke up, there was someone, or something, there in the corner with me. I didn't try to dramatize it. I just said exactly what I had experienced. They both went quiet for a second and exchanged a look. Not the kind of look people give when they think you're joking or exaggerating, but the kind that carries a shared understanding, like they both already knew something you didn't. The man was the one who spoke first. He told me that they had been living out there for over 20 years, and that even back then, the cabin up on that hill belonged to someone who kept mostly to himself. About 2 decades ago, that man had taken his own life inside that same cabin. He was found there, alone, and after that, no one ever really claimed the place. It just sat there, slowly falling apart, left to the elements. He went on to say that over the years, a lot of people passing through had mentioned strange things about it. Nothing consistent enough to form a clear story, but enough to give the place a reputation. Some said it felt wrong the moment you stepped inside. Others said they heard things, movement, sounds that didn't make sense. He even mentioned that behind the cabin, there were markings, symbols carved or painted into the wood and nearby surfaces. No one seemed to know exactly what they meant, but people associated them with occult stuff, rituals, things along those lines. Whether that was true or just people letting their imagination run, he couldn't say. What he did say was that they avoided that place as much as possible. The only time they ever went near it was when the dog ran off like that. And even then, they tried to call him back before he got too close. He told me the dog was usually incredibly obedient, calm, affectionate, but whenever it reacted to whatever was coming from that cabin, it was like something flipped. It stopped listening completely. The only thing it focused on was getting there and barking, like it was reacting to something very real in its mind. After that conversation, I didn't say much. I finished dinner, thanked them again, but my head was somewhere else entirely. That night, lying on that couch, I kept replaying everything, what I had seen, how it moved when the light hit it, the sound it made, and now this added layer of context they had given me. I tried to line it up with something logical, something grounded, but nothing quite fit in a way that felt convincing. I finished the rest of my trip after that, but I kept my distance from that area. I didn't go back to that cabin, didn't even pass near it again. And like I said before, I haven't really shared this with many people. It's hard to explain something when you don't fully understand it yourself. Especially when you come from a mindset where things are supposed to have clear explanations. I'm not someone who easily jumps to anything supernatural. I've always leaned toward rational explanations first. But whatever I saw in that cabin, it didn't feel like something I could just explain away.